Good afternoon, and welcome to the Roundtable conversation about voting rights as we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I'm Dr. Kurt Freeman, and I'm the director of the Institute on Development and Disability at Oregon Health and Science University. We're a 100-plus-year-old organization that's committed to improving the lives of those with disabilities through excellence in patient care, education, and training. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's event. The American with Disabilities Act, or ADA, is critically important as it prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability. Title II of the ADA explicitly requires state and local governments to ensure equal opportunity for those with disabilities to benefit from their programs. One of the programs explicitly mentioned in Title II is voting, the topic of today's roundtable. I think we can all agree that equal access to voting opportunities is a fundamental right and an important way that all citizens can express their preferences and engagement in community. Our roundtable today is presented by the Oregon Administration on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Coalition or Partnership, which is made up of the Oregon Council on Developmental Disabilities, Disability Rights Oregon, and the OHSU University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, which is part of the Institute on Development and Disability. As a federal agency, the AIDD is dedicated to ensuring that people with disabilities have opportunities to make their own choices, contribute to society, have supports to live independently, and live free of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. In each state and territory, AIDD grantees form a Developmental Disabilities Network, or DD network, made up of state councils on developmental disability, state protection and advocacy systems, and university centers for excellence in developmental disabilities. The work of each of these organizations complements each other and drives systems improvements for people with disabilities. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's roundtable, who will introduce herself, each of the panelists, and then facilitate today's discussion. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Kiersey Coleman. Kiersey is a disability advocate and activist in Portland, Oregon, where we can often see her in the city in her power chair. So I will now turn it over to Kiersey.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kiersey Coleman, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. I serve on the USAID, CPC, and do disability advocacy work in my community around intersectionality and disability justice. I'm passionate about helping my peers embrace the power they've always had. I'm 26, so I don't know a world without purpose and inclusive education. I have much gratitude for those who have come before me, such as Justin Dart, Ed Roberts, Stacy Park Milburn, and many others. Today I'm going to be using identity first language. Some people prefer person first language. I prefer identity first. It's important to ask people what they prefer. I will be facilitating our conversation today. We will start with a brief presentation from each of the DD network membership organizations: DRO, Disability Rights Oregon, the DD Council, and the USAID at OHSU. After the presentations, we will spend the rest of the time in discussion. I know many of you are used to the virtual world at this point, but we have a few reminders for today. We are recording the webinar and it will be available on the OHSU USAID website in a few days. The webinar is also streaming on the OHSU USAID CPC Facebook page. Live closed captioning and ASL interpretation are available. You can pin Audrey, the ASL interpreter, using the instructions in the chat. To turn on live closed captioning, please click on the CC icon at the bottom right of your Zoom screen. Your videos will be turned off and microphones muted while the panelists are presenting. During the roundtable conversation, you're welcome to put questions in chat, or you can raise your hand. You can use the raise hand button when we open the discussion for Q&A, and we will call on you and unmute you to ask your question. I think we're ready to get started. I'm excited to introduce Tom Stinson from Disability Rights Oregon. With that, I'll turn it over to Tom.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom Stinson from Disability Rights Oregon, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the legal background for disability rights as it relates to voting. And I'm going to try and share my screen with you guys right now. All right, here you go. So I work at Disability Rights Oregon. Disability Rights Oregon is a statewide organization. It's a protection and advocacy system, which means that we're funded through the government to provide services to people with disabilities to protect their legal rights and protect them from abuse and neglect. And one of the programs that funds us is called the Protection and Advocacy for Voting Access. It's specific to voting to ensure that people have access to their ability to register and to vote in elections. So there's several laws that affect how people can vote and what their rights are with regards to voting. One is the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. And that prohibits discrimination from public entities, including county clerk's offices, the state secretary of state, people who administer voting programs. Another important law is the Voting Rights Act, which says that people, anyone with or without a disability, can have a person to assist them, and it prohibits any literacy or knowledge tests. The National Voter Registration Act, which some people know as the Motor Voter Law, was a federal law which required DMVs and other places to register people to vote. It has some very important provisions, which I'll talk about in a little bit, about helping people with disabilities to vote. And the last act that's very important to know is the Help America Vote Act, which requires specifically accessible voting systems and has a number of specific requirements around how those voting machines, voting booths, voting processes have to be accessible to people with disabilities. This matters a lot, making voting accessible, making elections accessible, because 1 in 5 Americans have a disability, according to the US Census. And we haven't eradicated the barriers to voting for people with disabilities. You can tell because we're still seeing that people who have disabilities aren't able to vote in the same numbers as other people in the nation. So you'll see US citizens generally, our voting numbers are not as high as we'd like them to be, but they're over 50%. But people with disabilities are less likely to have voted. People who have disabilities around self-care and cognitive disabilities are even less likely to have voted. And I think that speaks to our need for a lot of people to improve their access, to get improved access to the voting process. And there are many barriers. So here are some of the challenges, and here are some of the benefits or the accommodations that are helpful to people in Oregon. So we do have large print voter registration forms and signature stamp attestation, so that people who have difficulty reading in conventional print because of low vision, for instance. They can get a large print form. They can also get a stamp to serve as their way of showing that they've signed something if they have difficulty with physically giving a signature. Elections offices, the main election office in Oregon is the statewide Secretary of State's office, but the ordinary voter is going to most often interact with their state county clerk, or with their county clerk at the county level for most of their voting needs. And those local election offices have to provide materials like voter guides in alternative formats. So that might mean electronic formats that are accessible. It also means that there's alternative formats on voting itself, a large print ballot, an accessible ballot. We have a great system in Oregon, I think, on the whole. We have a system of primarily voting by mail or through drop ballot boxes. The big challenge, the number one challenge, I think, is for voters who are blind or low vision. And because it's a physical ballot that you have to be able to read in order to fill out the conventional ballot that's used. So for people who are blind or low vision, or who have other disabilities where this would be helpful, you can get in-person assistance from up to 2 or more election staff, sometimes at the county clerk's office, sometimes even in your home as needed. You can also seek assistance from a person of your choice. And that's one of the many ways to make the process more accessible. Here we show a ballot marking device that somebody who has low vision can use in Oregon. And there's actually, this is a great video that's available through YouTube. If you search for voting with disability in Oregon, there's a wonderful video showing people using those ballot materials. We've been able to have some successes expanding some rules under the NVRA, which I'll explain further, improving accessibility at the Secretary of State's website. We have in the past put out an easy voting guide for people who have trouble reading the conventional voter's guide, who need simpler language, more straightforward presentation of facts. And it's available in large print and plain English. We've also been able in the past to put together ASL and caption video for people as needed. And we've supported several different changes. We've worked with the Oregon Self-Advocacy Coalition in improving voter outreach. So one of our other main roles is to improve education around voting so that people know what their rights are. Oregon has pretty broad legal protections. The only people who are not legally allowed to vote are people who are currently serving in prison on felony conviction. People who are not serving on a conviction, people who are out on probation, people who just have felony convictions, they're allowed to vote. So even many people who are in jail would be allowed to vote if they're not serving on a sentence. Many people believe wrongly that people who have disabilities, people who have guardians, aren't allowed to vote, and that's not true in Oregon. If you have a guardian, you're still allowed to vote. Your disability is not a reason to take away your right to vote. It shouldn't be, and in Oregon, it's the law that it can't be the reason to take away your right to vote. We're still educating people about the access to accommodation. Some people don't know that you have the right to all these different accessible steps, or don't know that they're available. They don't know that they're entitled to in-person assistance through the county clerk's office. to get assistance if they need it. We've been addressing the postage issue in terms of vote by mail barriers. You should now be able to vote without paying for postage. We've been working on getting physical access to drop sites. Sometimes the boxes where people drop ballots are not physically accessible. One of the big challenges has been a failure to register people with disabilities. In addition to having to register drivers who come to get their driver's license at the DMV, under the National Voter Registration Act, state entities that serve people with disabilities, government entities that serve people with disabilities and people who are poor, are supposed to register people. So the Medicaid program, ODDS, APD, other services that are directed at people with disabilities are supposed to register them to vote on a regular basis. And that often does not happen. And there's not great follow through on that. So if you're getting services, you have a caseworker through the state, you can ask for a ballot. You can ask for, or rather you can ask for a registration form. And because we vote by mail in Oregon, it is so important that people keep their addresses updated so that their ballots will get to them when it comes time. And then another issue that comes up for people with disabilities is a lack of privacy. If you need support in filling out your ballots, sometimes it's tough to maintain privacy. You know, what if you don't want to vote for somebody who, you know, your parents want to vote for, or your sibling wants to vote for, or your spouse wants to vote for? It's hard to, it's very important that people have the maximum independence in filling out their ballot so that they can maintain privacy in their ballot, so that they don't feel like they have to vote the way somebody else wants them to. And like everybody else, sometimes people feel disempowered. They feel like their vote doesn't count. We're going to continue to work on informing people about their rights and empowering them. We're reaching out as part of our work into detention centers, into nursing homes, into group homes. And we're trying to remind people about their rights, let them know that they can register to vote, let them know that you know, they aren't restricted from voting simply because they have a disability, and make sure that they know their rights around accommodations for people who need them. So we're also continuing to monitor the accessibility of those ballot drop boxes. We're monitoring the state's implementation of those requirements that they register people who receive benefits or services through the state. And one of the big ones is we're working on the COVID-19 impact on voting. So people have the right, as part of the accessible voting process, to get in-person assistance, especially if they're blind or low vision. That becomes real complicated when it's hard for people to meet up in person. Sometimes somebody who may have relied on someone to pick up their ballot from a PO box or something like that, that may have changed as their family and their supports change and their ability to come to their house. It's also really concerning that there's less engagement. People are focused on the pandemic and the immediate challenges. There's a huge drop in voter registration this year. And we want people to know that it's still important to come out and vote, and to know that you have that right. And to maintain, as one of the other big challenges is, many people are predicting there's going to be changes in housing. You know, as evictions happen, people's addresses are going to change. Keep that up. To maintain, we need to maintain those up-to-date registrations so that people can vote. I'm going to kind of blast through this I don't want to take up too much time. Service providers can help people. If you're a service provider, Make sure that your clients are getting the opportunity to vote, the opportunity to register, to maintain updated addresses, remind people of upcoming elections, make sure that people get their ballots and have the opportunity to cast it. Make sure that they know that they have the right to those supports and accommodations. Politicians and people who are working on disability rights issues should be getting involved with disability rights organizations, because we shouldn't be working on voting access without involving people with disabilities, without talking to them about what's most important to them. Make sure that forums are physically accessible, that they're held in places that are convenient and accessible to people with disabilities. That's about it. Here's our contact information. The new website up with all our materials up. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Alice Miller from the USAID. And I'm going to let her tell you what that stands for because I don't remember. Alice, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here. Thank you so much, Tom. So thank you for joining us today. My name is Alice Miller, and I work at the USAID here at OHSU, and that stands for the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. And my work here includes disability policy work, advocacy, and research. And today I'm going to share some findings from our USAID research project on voting behavior and election accessibility. I want to start with a quote from Justin Dart, who Kiersey mentioned earlier, an American activist and advocate for people with disabilities who helped to pass the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. And he co-founded the American Association of People with Disabilities. He says, vote as if your life depends on it, because it does. So why is voting important? Voting is one of the most important rights of a US citizen. It allows people to choose leaders they feel will represent their needs on local, state, and federal levels. And you can make real changes to your community by being an educated voter. For people with disabilities, the real life impact of policy is huge. This slide lists some examples of the types of policies that impact all of us, and especially people with disabilities. So what is the USAID's role in voting and civic engagement? The mission of our USAID is to improve the health and quality of life of Oregonians with disabilities and their families across the lifespan. And we accomplish this through leadership and collaboration with local, state, and national partners, serving as a resource for excellence in education, research and evaluation, community outreach, service, and information sharing. And one of the projects we're working on is identifying states where people with developmental disabilities have good, average, or I was just, can you all see my screen now? I think I maybe started a little without my first couple slides. Excuse me. Can I get a thumbs up if you're seeing my screen now?
We can see it now.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. So I'm going to skip ahead to slide 4 here. And I was starting to share about our voter accessibility project at the USAID, where we're identifying states that have poor, average, and good voter turnout and looking at accessibility features of voting in those states. And we're using data from the National Core Indicators Project which is a yearly survey of adults with developmental disabilities that the USAID conducts. And we also work to provide lay language and accessible disability research and policy products to help educate voters and potential voters on topics related to civil rights, education, healthcare, and employment. And finally, once elected, we work with policymakers on agenda setting and advise on disability policy issues. So where are we now? I think Tom had some information about voter turnout for people with disabilities. And I wanted to just highlight in the 2018 midterm election, voter turnout for people with disabilities was almost 50% of people eligible to vote, compared to 54% of the general population. And I just wanted to share a little bit of data from the National Core Indicators Project to show kind of the age breakdown of what we expect to see in voting citizens with disabilities. And consistent with the general population, younger folks are voting less. So we have some work to do in that area. And using this data, we see that if people with disabilities voted at the rate that their peers voted, we would have 2.35 million more voters with disabilities informing our election results. So on this slide, the chart on the left side of the slide shows states that stood out as either being ranking highest or lowest in voter access according to the most recent round of NCI surveys. As you can see, Oregon was ranked number 5. So, and we stood out, we were statistically significantly above the average voter participation at 54% of voters. And then I also included the bottom 5 states, with Kentucky being the lowest access to voting at only 7% of people with disabilities reporting that they either voted or had the opportunity to vote. And the map on the right side of your screen shows all the states that participated in the survey in 2018 and 19, and the, let's see. So the green state, so Oregon is one of those, indicates significantly higher than average voter participation. The yellow states are within the normal range, so within the average range for voting. And the red states are significantly below the average. And the average of all states was 37%. Okay, and we get a lot of questions about mail-in voting, and that's actually one of the first things we wanted to look at when determining which states had the most accessible voting systems. And the states in green, so just a handful of states have all mail-in voting. The blue states have an option for mail-in voting, and the yellow states have some elections using mail-in voting. I wanted to make a comment about absentee voting. So all states will mail an absentee ballot to certain voters if they request one. And most of these states will do that for any qualified voter. A few states, you have to have an excuse or a specific reason to vote by mail. But we do have the option for mail-in voting through absentee voting in all states, with just the states highlighted here having mail-in voting outside of the absentee voting process. And on this slide, I wanted to highlight some features of Oregon's voting system and our rules. This is an example of the types of data that we're looking at in our voter accessibility project. And as Tom mentioned, felons in Oregon can vote as long as they're not currently incarcerated with a felony conviction serving out their term. We don't have guardianship rules that prohibit the right to vote. You don't need to get an exception for an absentee ballot. We don't require voter IDs. We allow for alternative ballot formats. So screen readers, tablets, elections offices, computers are available for folks. And we're looking at states, how states kind of compare based on features, other features of accessible voting as well. Okay, so in the next 30 years, and maybe much sooner, we'll probably see a lot of changes in the way that people vote. My hope, and I think the hope of all of us on this call, is that these changes will help increase voter turnout for everyone, including people with disabilities. And there are many ways that overall voter turnout efforts can be accessible to people with disabilities. And I list some examples here on the screen of efforts to make voting more accessible and more inclusive. Okay, so thank you very much. Those are all the slides. I really apologize for the first couple slides not being presented. If you have questions about those, I can return to any of those slides, but I'm gonna now introduce our partner, Riley Newport from the Oregon DV Council, and Phil Stone from the Oregon Self-Advocacy Coalition for their presentation.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna share my screen. And all right. Can you see it? We're good?
Yep.
Okay. All right, Phil. So my name is Riley Newport. I'm the Communications Director at the Oregon Council on Developmental Disability. Phil, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Phil Stone. I'm former the head chair of the Oregon Self-Advocacy Coalition, codename OSAC. And we are here to talk about voting rights.
I also wanted to mention, just because I feel grateful for the opportunity in the past, I worked for Senator Tom Harkin, who was the author of the ADA and the chief sponsor in the US Senate. So I've been able to work with him before, and Senator Harkin was, I believe, the first person to ever sign a speech on the floor of the Senate. And he was an amazing person to work for and had a vision for the ADA, and very happy to have that experience. So, well, Phil, today I'm going to ask you a couple of questions.
Okay.
First one, why is it important for people with disabilities to vote?
Because people with intellectual and developmental disabilities should know have a right to vote, so that they don't get left out, or they know what is gonna happen to them if they don't vote for the people that they want to see in office.
So they have the same rights as everyone else
Yeah,
to demonstrate the power of their voice.
Yes.
So Phil, here on this page, I wrote out our mission, the mission of the council to advance social and policy change for the people with disabilities can be a part of their community. We also when we work on changing systems change and policy change, we do that hand in hand with people with disabilities and their family members. And your role in the past was the chair of OSAC, right? And
Yes.
What is OSAC?
Oregon Self-Advocacy Coalition. It was formed after South Advocates as Leaders, because they wanted to form a statewide coalition, and me and myself and a few others um, helped start up OSAC, which is Organ Self-Advocacy Coalition.
And OSAC's worked with DRO and the self-advocates becoming empowered to do a series of voter trainings. And we're going to highlight some of what you've come up with in the past in today's presentation. So we just have a few minutes. All right. So Phil, what motivates you to vote?
What motivates me is I want to be a part of the community and be able to see, what changes are going to come about for people with, especially for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I want to see positive instead of the negative. If that.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So what if you heard from other people with disabilities about why they vote?
So that they can see a positive change instead of the negative, and so that way they have a voice, and that way they can vote for the person that they want to see in office.
And on the issues that matter to them, right?
Yeah, what issues matter to them.
So OSAC you have on your website, this is some of a statement that you've used in your past work. We advocate for the equal rights of people with disabilities. We fight for self-determination and full inclusion in society. Voting is an important part of that inclusion, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So what kind of information do people need to know when they're voting?
What's basically on the ballot itself, and what the issues will be for what they choose, but it's their prerogative to choose whatever whoever they want, whatever they want to see. For instance, having a little bit of education so you know what to see or expect on a ballot, having the right information, and plus two, having the right supports for when you vote.
Perfect. That's a great point, and I'm going to bring that up next. So a few of the things that you've mentioned in your past presentations is that people should know about the candidates they're voting for or those that they don't want to see elected. So they were voting against someone, to know about the issues that impact their life, and to have access to training and information to learn more about these things.
Correct.
So now, Phil, when we worked with DRO in the past on the Easy Voting Guide, OSAC came up with a list of sort of like, I know you do a lot of work with your support mandate and what support should do during your legislative work with legislators, but you also say what supports should do during the voting process. So I took your May 2018 tips, just a few of them, and I thought I'd highlight them here.
Okay.
So a few things about how supports should act. How can supports help you before voting?
Helping, sort of helping you make the right decisions and the information and whatnot. And if you can't, you don't fully understand, having somebody there to kind of help you understand it.
Perfect. So, and one of the things I know you've shared a lot about, the Easy Voting Guide, maybe reviewing that with your supporter, and then looking at the voters pamphlet and looking for more information so you can be informed and educated voter.
Yes.
So getting through all that information. And then when you're preparing, that's a big part of it. Do you have recommendations about how to support someone by asking them questions, or help maybe writing things down, or?
That sounds good. But having that person, but not having them, really look over your shoulder. Letting you do the voting part, just giving you the information, the logistics, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so I know that this is what we had used in the past, is to encourage the person you're supporting to write down or bring up questions, however your support works. But I know you often say, don't ask me a yes or a no question. So that, help me learn and understand information and support me in that way. But so there are different supports, and this can be helpful to kind of take notes. Maybe that would be a role of a supporter during preparing to vote. So and lastly, we kind of already talked about this, but what do we ask of supporters? Their role. What do we ask of their role?
To basically let us do the voting. Maybe we have a different opinion from who they want to see and whatnot.
Totally. So you're there to help someone vote. You're not there to tell them who or what to vote for, right?
Right. Exactly.
And that voting support during that voting process can be helping someone who might need help with communication or requesting accommodations.
Yes.
Great. Well, I believe that takes us to our last slide. And thanks for listening. And we look forward to any questions or comments you might have for Phil and I. I'm going to hand it over to Kiersey Coleman now.
Okay.
Turn your video.
Yeah. Hello. Sorry, I had to get my video back on. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Awesome. So now we have some questions for our presenters. And the first question we kind of went over already, but this first question is for the USED. So which states have vote by mail options?
Hi, everyone. This is Alice. I'm going to just bring back this map, and hopefully more successfully than the first try, share my screen with you all and look at this map here. But like I mentioned, all states actually have some sort of mail-in voting through the absentee ballot process. And more states are moving towards mail-in voting options. For example, Utah and Hawaii are new to allowing mail-in voting.
Want this up here?
And I saw we do have some questions in the chat as well from Facebook. Kiersey, do you want to go to those questions?
Oh, yeah, definitely. A question from an attendee on Facebook Live. Do people need to register a certain amount of time ahead of an election to be able to vote in that election?
I can take this one. In Oregon, you have to register to vote. I believe it's 21 days before the election. So a good place to go is to check the Secretary of State's website. We have an upcoming election in August here, and then obviously there's one in November. So keep an eye on those deadlines, because it is important to make sure that your registration is, if you haven't registered, to get registered before that deadline. And remember, you have to update your address pretty regularly so that the ballot comes to your resident.
And then there's another question what should a person do if someone tries to tell them that they shouldn't vote or tries to restrict them from voting?
I could probably take that one. Pretty much it's your opinion and your opinion only. You know, I mean, if you want to listen to the people, to that person, that's up to you, but it's actually your decision whether you want to vote for that person or not, and to vote, you know, at all.
And then, Phil, this question is for you, it sounds like, and maybe for everyone, but they specifically say, Phil, thank you for your leadership. How do you think we can get even more people with disabilities out to vote?
Like, I would say like kind of like brochures and informing certain places like RCO or Mentors of Oregon, or even in the library if they will have it.
Yeah, and I think that's really a great point to and I would like to answer that question. Just knowing that I am a disabled woman of color, so I'm brown, and I interact with different communities, and so doing outreach in all of the intersectional communities, because people hold different identities. And someone says um, in the chat, for anyone, do you think that the recent attention on voter suppression in communities of color nationally can help call attention to other groups, such as people with disabilities who experience unequal access to voting? So, does anyone want to answer that, or I can answer that?
I would be okay to answer that. It don't matter if you're white, black, brown, purple, or blue. You are an American citizen, and you should have a right to vote, no matter if you're disabled or not disabled. It is what it is.
Yeah, and I would just also emphasize the intersectionality that people have in their identities, and understanding that, you know, people have very we all have very complex identities. So
Can I make a comment on that too, Kiersey?
yes.
I think the person who asked the question is really right to be concerned about voter suppression efforts. And I think that the people with disabilities and communities of color and the many, many people that exist at the intersection of those two groups really should be allied in their efforts to increase turnout and protect the right to vote. I think what helps make voting accessible for people with disabilities most often will also help make voting accessible for everyone. So I think, and in Oregon, I think we have some lessons that others can learn from in accessible voting. It'd be really interesting to see kind of the turnout. You know, we're just looking at disability at the USED, but I wouldn't be surprised to see that voting by mail increases accessibility for everyone. And I think kind of another thing to remember at the heart of voting and what work is yet to be done is that we want a representative government, and we don't have that right now. we don't have enough leaders that are people of color, and we certainly don't have enough leaders with disabilities. And so until we really are seeing representation in our electorate and our elected officials, I think there's a lot of work to do for both those groups and together. It makes sense to do that work together.
Thank you, Alice. I definitely agree. So here's another question. What measures and legislator would you consider to be important in the upcoming political season? So, does anyone want to answer that one? What about you, Tom? Do you have any opinions or ideas?
We're a nonpartisan organization. We don't endorse particular candidates, but I think this is an extremely important election season, and I'd encourage everybody to take a look at the issues that are coming up and to look at the candidates carefully, because it really is vitally important. The other thing that's happening right now that people should be aware of is the census, because that influences how we get the number of members of Congress that we get. That influences how much Medicaid funding we get. That influences how much money for schools we get. So I'd encourage everybody, in a part of the voting process is actually being included in the census. And so I want to put in a plug for that at this
time. And there is a link here, and maybe we can post that more readily, because I'm not sure if it's available. There's a web link for registering online in Oregon, and I'm not sure if the audience can also see that. So maybe we can post that somewhere else as well. So if somebody could maybe facilitate that. And then I had a question for Disability Rights Oregon. So what role does a protection and advocacy organization like DRO play in protecting voting rights? And I was kind of curious about this. So do they help get out the vote? I heard you say that they might help people register, but do they also provide safe polling locations? Like what is being done in that area, Tom?
So we don't do direct advocacy to get people to the polls or to, well, and there aren't any polls in Oregon to go to, but we're more about ensuring that people's legal rights are respected. So if someone told someone they weren't allowed to register to vote, or didn't allow them to cast a ballot, that's something we could look into. We've had some challenges around maintaining funding for the accessible voter guide, but we will be doing a limited rollout of that this year to make sure that people can understand what initiatives are, what's on the ballot, what they mean, what the pros and cons of them are. So that's a significant piece of advocacy that we do. But a lot of it is about making sure that people get registered, that there aren't legal barriers to that, or that people who are obligated to help people register to vote aren't ignoring those obligations. Does that make sense, Kiersey? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. And another question that I really stood behind is so all people, especially disabled people and people with disabilities, are hugely impacted by public policy. How can we make sure the disability population is empowered in setting policy agendas for candidates for elected office? And that can go to everyone. And I thought this was a really important question to ask.
Your question is, how can more people with disabilities run for elected office? Was that, oh, did I? Or
I think, how can we make sure the disability population is empowered in setting policy agendas for candidates for elected office? So, that could be running for election or just setting a policy up that includes disabled people and people with disabilities, or that could be elected office. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I want to give a question to Phil, because Phil worked with a group of self-advocates who traveled around Oregon and spoke with young people with disabilities who are graduating high school, and talked about the importance of self-advocacy and why voting is an important part of being a self-advocate. If that's a, you know, if while you're hearing the history of the disability rights movement and then you understand the way voting fits in there, Phil, what are the ways you see that, like the future generations, getting them to get out and vote and see the power of their voice?
I would say getting them educated any way that we can, to be able to get the knowledge of being able to go out here and vote, and the material and whatnot. I'd like to see more people with intellectual, especially from the youth of the leaders of tomorrow, get whatever education they can get to vote, so that way they're not left out in the outfield.
And don't you think there should be more people with disabilities representing, and as legislators, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that would be.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I just want to say, as a disability activist, that I feel like the ADA was really driven, and the policy was driven by disabled folks and people with disabilities, like Judy Heumann, like Justin Dart, who met with their leaders, but were also leaders in their communities. And I can't really. Crip Camp is a great documentary. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to plug that. But yeah. So we are at the end of time, and I just want to say thank you for joining us today, and please take time to complete the quick poll or 2-question poll at the end, kind of at this time.
Okay, the poll is up, and the first question is, the ADA Roundtable increased my knowledge about voting rights. Strongly agree, agree, disagree, or strongly disagree. And the second question is, overall, how satisfied are you with the ADA Roundtable on voting rights? And the answers are very satisfied, satisfied, dissatisfied, or very dissatisfied. Okay. And just wait one more second for the last person to vote. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and close the poll. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you everybody for coming. And if you want to learn more about the ADA, like I said, Crimp Camp on Netflix is a great resource. Thank you.
Not a problem.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.